New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore makes it very, very clear that quarterback will be a very busy position heading in to 2025. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we spoke with Kellen Moore here in Palm Beach, Florida. Not a bad place to have to wake up early for a Tuesday workday, by the way. And spoke with him, and he gave us some great information. Talked a little bit about his really unique perspective on positional value. Told us that the New Orleans Saints will not be doing training camp outside of New Orleans this year. So training camp is back in Metairie, and let us know that quarterback effectively is going to be a big position and a busy position going into 2025 for a variety of different reasons. We're going to break all of that down here on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. Kellen Moore minced no words when it came to the quarterback position for the New Orleans Saints. And in three different ways, he explained to us that quarterback was going to be a busy focus over the course of the 2025 offseason. Let's start where it all starts, which is the starting quarterback. Derek Carr will be the starting quarterback in 2025. Kellen Moore is not mincing words anymore. There's no more of the sort of non-committal approach to the position and all those other things. Maybe the initial non-committal approach was all about making sure that he got a meeting in with these guys and having these conversations and stuff like that. There was this desire for Derek Carr to potentially test the market. That seems to be behind them, not necessarily by choice. I mean, the Saints went ahead and restructured him, so it just kind of is what it is at this point. But there were continued conversations about whether or not the Saints would consider trading Derek Carr post June 1. Some have tried to lump him into potential trade, draft day trade circumstances. That can't happen because the Saints would plummet above the salary cap situation, and they can't do that. And so you would have to trade him after June 2nd. It's not to say that this thing is completely sewed up and is 100% guaranteed. We know it's the NFL. Nothing is 100% guaranteed. But at this point, it seems like everybody is in place here for the New Orleans Saints to roll ahead with Derek Carr as a starting quarterback, including Derek Carr, which had become the next big question mark. Kellen Moore was asked about Derek Carr, and he said that he's excited to have him back here very shortly. They'll begin things in April. April 7th is when teams with new head coaches can begin off-season workout programs. He was referencing April 14th, so maybe that's the starting date when veterans end up showing up. Maybe some of the younger guys start early. We'll see how it goes. But he mentioned that was kind of the next step for them, and that Derek Carr will be in the building beginning April 14th and get everything started with the team. And then he was very, very clear when he was asked specifically, is Derek Carr excited? Now I'm going to be a little nitpicky here. I'm just going to be honest with you. But he was pretty clear when he was asked, was Derek Carr excited to be back with the team, kind of liking the direction that things are going? Here's what Kellen Moore actually said, quote, "Yeah, we're excited to team up." And to be fair, he said it right off the cuff immediately, no thought, no hesitation, nothing like that. But he said, we're excited to team up. Didn't necessarily say that Derek Carr was excited. So I'll be a little nitpicky there, but that's just me mincing words. Look, the Saints are very clearly ready to move ahead with Derek Carr. Should something spectacular happen in the draft, maybe that changes the course of where things go. And, we should always reserve the possibility that things go, in a different direction than we expect, of course. But it seems like things are kind of headed in the right situation here. Okay, so that's number one for the big kind of busy quarterback situation ongoing for New Orleans. The next thing that we should look at when it comes to the quarterback situation is the potential for a quarterback to be drafted in this year's draft. Kellen Moore was pretty clear about that as well. On that, Moore said that every NFL team is always looking to bring in quarterbacks to develop under any circumstances. He went on to say everyone does homework on quarterbacks, kind of what we've been saying here on the show for a while, but that it's obviously a very valuable position. But look, I do think, and it was Albert Breer over at SI who pointed out that Kellen Moore being in attendance for Jaxson Dart's Ole Miss Pro Day in person isn't insignificant, is the phrase that he uses, signifying that it could be significant. And I do think that it is. Look, this team is doing homework on quarterbacks. And if we look at what they've done and what the track record has been over the course of the last couple of years, I know it's a different coaching staff. I know it's a different head coach, but it's still Jeff Ireland. It's still Mickey Loomis. The Saints traded up for Jake Haener 2 years ago. They drafted in the 4th round. They drafted Spencer Rattler in the 5th round last year. The idea of drafting a quarterback this year shouldn't be considered a foreign idea or an unlikely idea anymore. And I'm saying that as somebody who said that this team should avoid the quarterback class behind the top 2 guys. I still think that they should. But if they decide that they want to go out there and do that, then I do think that there's something to that. And so that's something that then creates a little bit more of that busy work at quarterback and why this position is getting so much attention over the course of the season or the offseason. And it makes perfect sense why that's the case. This is the most important position in quarterback, as I like to most important position in quarterback. Yes, Ross. Great analysis. Quarterback is the most important position in football. And as I always like to note, some would argue that it's the most important position in professional sports. And so, yeah, you want to make sure you've got whoever your guy is going to be for 2025, but your guy for 2025 isn't necessarily your future. And the guys that you have in the building behind the guys at 2025 aren't necessarily your future either. And so you want to make sure you're adding somebody else that could potentially be your future. The trick behind the starting quarterback is that just as much as they might not be your future starter, they might be your future starter. The trick with a rookie quarterback is just as much as they might be your future starter, they might not be your future starter. And so continue to invest and take swings at the position. I think we'll continue to see the Saints doing that, whether that's this year or going into next year. Not specifically because of any particular feelings about next year's draft, but because it sounds like the Saints just simply want to continue to invest in the position. Now, here's the other thing, and the last point, number 3, is the Saints backup quarterback battle. So you've got the busy situation going on with Derek Carr, seems to be heading in what we would call the right direction for the team, even though maybe not necessarily the right direction for the fan. And then, just to fairly acknowledge that, and then the other piece is the draft process and the potential of landing a quarterback. But then what happens behind Derek Carr? Remember last year, Dennis Allen, ex-New Orleans Saints head coach, kept the quarterback battle going all the way through into the regular season and even up until the late parts of the week when their starting quarterback was injured. And they needed to be getting another quarterback ready. And instead they were getting a pair of quarterbacks ready and having them still battle in season, which to me was a very clumsy way to go about that conversation. Well, Kellen Moore will not make the same mistake. He said very clearly, in almost every circumstance, you have to have the backup quarterback, that. But he said, that. But anyway, the backup quarterback defined going into the season is what he said. You've got to know who your backup quarterback is and just understand that there's a progression there. Not going to say never, ever, right? Obviously, he'll leave some things open there, but I feel pretty strong about this because reps in season, you have to set it a certain way. And so, you get those limited practice reps and stuff like that. We saw that become an issue for both of those young quarterbacks that were put in not so advantageous situations coming in for Derek Carr during the season last year. So don't expect Kellen Moore to make what I would call the same mistake that Dennis Allen had. He will use OTAs, training camp, and the preseason to find and define a backup quarterback who will be the backup quarterback for the 2025 season. That to me is a massive step in the right direction for the New Orleans Saints as a whole, and good decision-making by Kellen Moore. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints training camp will be back in Metairie, and the Saints are very happy with their tackle tandem. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you're somebody that's looking to not only get control of your finances, track your spending, understand your budgets, and gain wealth, Monarch Money is a fantastic way to go. All of those different things that I named, you're going to need a different app for. Usually, but Monarch Money gives you an all-in-one solution in one place and even opens up opportunities for easy collaboration. So if you're managing your wealth with somebody else, you can share information, track budgeting together, do all of it without all of the stress of trying to manage across multiple apps amongst multiple people, all of that. It's like your own personal CFO on the go with you. I absolutely love Monarch Money. Stop budgeting your finances and start managing your wealth today. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, family. Good news for New Orleans Saints fans. Training camp is back in Metairie. Kellen Moore said in no uncertain terms that training camps will be back in Metairie. They're going to practice in Louisiana. They'll certainly look and try to find the opportunity to go somewhere else for a short period of time, probably trying to escape the heat, but also likely pursuing those joint practices. Actually, he said that they will potentially pursue those joint practices or that they're pursuing joint practices. And so maybe if, they can't agree to something with another team or whatever, maybe they don't happen, but I would guarantee that they do or close to guarantee that they do. This is something the New Orleans Saints love to do, particularly out in the West Coast as well. We've seen the Saints do this over and over again in terms of joint practices during the preseason, all that. So I'd absolutely expect the New Orleans Saints to hit the road for a little while, but for the most part, training camp is back in Metairie. And this is great news, right? The New Orleans Saints went out to UC Irvine out on the West Coast, my alma mater. Go Anteaters, zot zot. But they went out to UC Irvine and Orange County last year, and it took away the opportunity for local fans to be able to, and even didn't get the chance for California fans, West Coast fans out there, of which there are plenty. But they didn't get the opportunity to host fans at the facility, out at UC Irvine, all that. And there were a lot of different reasons for that, but not the least of which being the renovations going on Airline Drive that kept the team from being able to practice at their home facility. That will not be the case here in 2025. Training camp will be back at home. Very likely that means that open practices will be back, and that's great news for the New Orleans Saints and great news for New Orleans Saints fans who want to be able to come and see their new head coach in action, their new defensive coordinator in action, their new coaching staff in action, and some new pieces in action as well. And some of the new pieces that fans didn't get to see last year, that joined last year, that are still around this year, even that, getting the opportunity to go and see those players. And so this is great. I was really happy to hear this. And Kellen Moore minced no words. Training camp will be back in New Orleans. I think that the idea of going and getting away from the heat, doing joint practices, going somewhere else, and of course, I always think joint practices are valuable simply for the fact that you get to practice against unfamiliar opponents. You get used to that same edge rusher that you line up against using this move, that move. The edge rushers start to diagnose what it is that work against the offensive tackles, and all of a sudden they keep doing that. The wide receivers know this release always gives this cornerback trouble, but that corner is really good against this release, so I'm going to do that a little bit less, whatever. All of these different things, they get used to kind of the idiosyncrasies of one another, and that impacts their ability to practice against one another. So getting up against unfamiliar opponents, getting their hands on unfamiliar opponents, getting those padded practices against unfamiliar opponents, all of that, you hear every single player talk about the value of that. And so I think that there is there's real value in those joint practices. But the big highlight here, in addition to that, is that the Saints will be back home for training camp. So great news there, and great news for Saints fans that want to come out to Airline and be able to see the Saints, because very likely more than, several of those practices will be open to the public as well. While quarterback was obviously a big topic that we knew we were going to dive into with Kellen Moore and his availability here in Palm Beach, one of the other positions that I really wanted to dive into as well was the tackle tandem, the starting tackle tandem for the team. The Saints drafted Taliese Fuaga last year, somebody that some NFL teams looked at as a possible, guard, somebody that could potentially move inside. But the Saints ended up starting him at left tackle, even though he was a career right tackle at Oregon State, and then took Trevor Penning, who started at left tackle for New Orleans after he was drafted a few years ago, and moved him over to right tackle. How comfortable are they with both of those players going into 2025, and what's the potential for the team to invest in that position high in the draft or at all in the draft? And it sounds like the Saints are very comfortable with both players. Matt Paris over at NOLA.com got the question in about Taliese Fuaga, and when it came to him at left tackle, Kellen Moore was very, very clear. We see him as a left tackle. He could play anywhere. He's a big-time player. Bang, super sweet, super simple. Even said yeah at the beginning of that to confirm, yes, we do see him as a left tackle, the New Orleans Saints. And so it sounds like you can expect Taliese Fuaga to be there at left tackle. Not really a big surprise there. You invested that early first round pick in him. He's panned out over in that area. He had a stellar rookie season last year. And so obviously you want to kind of keep that going. As for Trevor Penning over at right tackle, I followed up with that question because I was curious. Because remember, he made that transition, right, from the left side to the right side, and I thought performed well throughout the season, had some ups, downs, hot, cold moments, things like that. But overall, throughout the season, performed particularly well over at that right tackle spot. And he said very clearly as well, when I asked him, do you still see Trevor Penning as a right tackle? He said, yeah, we've got him there. We feel good, continuing to develop. So an acknowledgement, of course, that things will continue to progress with both of these players. Taliese Fuaga, of course, just in his first year. Trevor Penning in his first year as a right tackle. Obviously, you're expecting things will continue to change, grow, shape, move, evolve, all of that, right? There's no doubt about any of that. However, sounds like the Saints are pretty comfortable at both of those tackle spots. Now, that doesn't mean that the Saints won't invest in tackle. I still think that you need to. In fact, I think that would be a smart thing for the Saints to do, whether that be late free agency or during this year's draft. One of the reasons being that you need depth there, even if you're really solid about your two starters, you absolutely need depth at the position. So you could go later on in the draft and draft like a Wyatt Milam, who gives you some of the versatility outside or inside, a Chase Lunn coming out of UConn, who's this big 6'7", massive guy that could play tackle for you, help to back up the position. But otherwise, the Saints kind of have a Dylan Radins who can play outside and in and kind of move around, Josh Ball, who they added late last season, and then Landon Young, who they brought back on a one-year deal this offseason, who can play both inside and out as well. But you probably want like a dedicated backup tackle. That would make some sense. And the Saints will see, very likely, Ryan Ramczyk retire later on this year, likely after June 1st. Even if the announcement is made before then he would end up actually posting his retirement after June 1st. And that is just to help with accounting and things like that for New Orleans. And so, who else do you have at tackle at this point? And certainly, you can make the argument that some of these other players could potentially move outside and things like that. But I do think that investing in depth there absolutely makes sense for this team. They dealt with a lot of injury on the interior last year. Actually, the tackles, Taliese Fuaga and Trevor Penning stayed healthy, right? Played every game, all those other things. But I do think that, or most games, and I do think that you might want to expect that to happen again. You certainly love to see that happen again. But what do you do if it doesn't, right? So you got to be ready for that. And look, if something happens at the top of the draft and all these trade ups and things like that potentially happen that shake up the boards, and all of a sudden the best player available is Will Campbell out of LSU or Missouri Zaman Membu, you might still take that player and then just try to figure out, okay, who are your best 5 offensive linemen and how do you get them all out on the field on the same time? And that could mean trying Taliese Fuaga out at guard or moving Trevor Penning to guard. I think you're probably more likely to try to move Penning to guard because you just invested that high first round pick in. Look, you invested fairly decent first round picks in both of those players, Fuaga and Penning, but you just invested the first round pick in Fuaga, and he didn't really do anything to tell you that he can't play at that spot. So I think you probably move Penning in first and give him a shot there, or you draft one of those tackles and see if they work out at guard for you. It doesn't matter. You get the best 5 players on that offensive line, keep them healthy, and that's going to be the way that things go. So I wouldn't say that this means that the Saints won't take a tackle in the first round. Maybe it's less likely, but I think in the situation we're right, and it gives you your 5 best offensive linemen, and your big problem is figuring out how to use them, good problem to have, but it feels like maybe an investment later in the draft is more likely, to be fair. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore gave a fantastic answer to how it is that he views positional value when it comes to players that play certain positions and where they should be drafted. I loved his answer. Let me share it with you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the only sportsbook that you need to make sure you can get in on that March Madness action all tournament long like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's it. That's all you got to do. Join. Put $5 down, you win that first $5 bet. That's $200 extra bucks that you can then play on things like buzzer beaters and Cinderella stories, and even put some down on who could be cutting down the net at the end of each of these tournaments. Both tournaments raging on. You got the Final Four set. Paige Beckers and the UConn Huskies look unstoppable, but eventually have to get around South Carolina, of course, as well. UCLA continuing to move ahead. Absolute fireworks over in the women's tournament. Great stuff to get in on over at FanDuel today. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore spoke with local and national media, others from all around, here in Palm Beach during the annual meetings. And one of the questions that I asked him was how he views positional value. And let me define that term for anybody that's unfamiliar with it real quick. When we talk about positional value, what we mean is like certain positions can only be valued so high. Like there's a cap on the way that certain positions are valued. Think about kicker, fullback, punter, right? Those are not first round positions. That's a place where you would talk about positional value. It's a very extreme example, but positional value is something that is always brought up, and there's a lot of discourse around it on certain positions that are considered non-premium. You think about your premium positions on offense being the guy that throws the football, the quarterback, the guy that catches the football, the wide receiver, the guy that blocks the people trying to get after the guy throwing the football so that the guy can throw the football to the guy that catches the football. That would be tackle. Then on the defensive side, you look at the guy that's trying to get after the guy that's throwing the football. That's the edge rusher, as well as the guy that's man on man, locked up with the guy that's trying to catch the football, cornerback. Those are considered kind of your 5 premier or premium positions. All the other positions around that area are considered like non-premium, linebacker, running back, safety, so far away from the football, all those other things. But here's what I think is kind of the biggest sort of discourse around premium positions. And it's typically like linebacker, tight end, and running back. Are they worthy of being first round picks? That's always the biggest moment where you get to those questions, right? When you're talking about the draft. And so I asked Kellen Moore how it is that he views things around that conversation. And I thought it was really interesting the way that he laid it out. So the way that he laid it out is that it's all about, for him, guys that impact the game or guys having an impact on the game. He said, I think that with skill position guys, sometimes you get stuck with running back, fullback, receiver, maybe slot only or outsider, maybe only a tight end. The skill position group, I kind of sometimes lump together. You just want impact players. And I love this. I love this approach, especially in this year's draft, where you could have 2 tight ends and 2 running backs, or really, let me rephrase that, especially in this draft where you do have 2 tight ends and 2 running backs who have consistently been talked about as potential first round picks. Penn State's Tyler Warren, Michigan's Colton Loveland, and then you also have on the running back side, Ashton Jeanty, of course, out of Boise State, and then Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. Those 4 players, non-premium positions on the offensive side. And oh, hey, by the way, Alabama's Jahad Campbell. Depending upon how some teams look at him, Georgia's Jalen Walker. Are they considered linebackers? Are they not? Georgia's Malachi Starks, safety. Are they first-round players, or are they not first-round players just because of the position designation that's attached to their name? I think that a view like Kellen Moore's is really important in today's day and age, because what this effectively says is that high impact players, regardless of position, are going to be valued more than lower impact players at prime positions. And I think that's a smart way to go, especially in a situation like the one that the New Orleans Saints are in, which is not a bad situation, but is a situation in which there's no wrong answer in terms of how they go about this draft. You want to address and draft as many different positions. You want to address and draft talent at several different premier positions and several different non-premium positions as well. And I could see the New Orleans Saints benefiting from Kellen Moore's way of looking at things, where he said that he has certainly done things throughout his career that have attached him to being an 11 personnel guy, 3 wide receivers. He said, if you've got 2 premier tight ends, you're going to play a lot of 12 personnel. If you've got 2 premier running backs, you want those guys on the field. So for him, it's all about having the flexibility of the scheme that you play in order to make sure that you're doing what it is that best suits the talent on your roster. And this has been Kellen Moore's MO for as long as we've talked to him, going all the way back to the Super Bowl when we stalked him all throughout the week at his media availabilities, where he's supposed to be talking about the Super Bowl and the Philadelphia Eagles. And we're like, hey, so what would you do if you were with the New Orleans Saints? Just curious, and everything. And like from the very, very beginning, that has been his approach. He's been solid. He has been consistent on that from the very beginning, that is the way that he would go about things, adjusting to what he has. And I think that with this kind of mentality around this draft and positional value and all those other pieces, that he is in position to have to make the approach that fits in the draft what it is that he plans to do on the field. And I think that's a good way to go. Now, look, Jeff Ireland is just as much in charge of anything when it comes to like who's selected and all these other pieces. Kellen Moore, Brandon Staley, Phil Galliano, they all have their opportunities to be able to say, like, get in alignment, right? Here's who we like, here's who you like, all this other stuff. I don't think there's going to be any disagreements about who's going to be there on the board at 9 and who they should take. But certainly it sounds like positional value wise, there won't be too much stagnation just because a guy has a TE next to his name or just because a guy has an RB next to his name instead of having a W and an R. And I think that's a wise move, especially in this year's draft where there are only so many big time superstar level, potential superstar level players. And some of them are at non-premium positions: defensive tackle, running back, defensive tackle Mason Graham, running back Ashton Jeanty, and then of course, tight end Tyler Warren included in that number. Yeah. Take advantage of the opportunity to be able to bring somebody in that's going to impact your game, not based on what their position designation was in college. So really good stuff from Kellen Moore. And we're getting closer and closer and closer to the draft, obviously almost 3 weeks away. And they're, going to get more things going on at the facility here soon. And so lots of good stuff on the way here for the New Orleans Saints. Before we wrap up today, I wanted to tell you about 2 new shows that I'm a part of that are launching that I want to make sure that you're aware of, one of which will happen on this very channel. Let me tell you first, though, about a collaboration that we're working. And look, you stick around for this if you want to. You don't have to. But like the idea here is to give you as much content as possible. And I think we figured out a way to add more content. So first of which, on the WWL Plus app, you'll be able to find the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show. This is a dream come true for me. I'm just going to be completely vulnerable with you, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. Absolute dream come true for me. I grew up watching Channel 4 in New Orleans, and now I'm doing shows with Channel 4, which is always crazy to me. But now a show that I co-host with sports director Doug Mouton that features some of our local media, that features a bunch of our Locked On local experts, including Matt Moscona heavily over at Locked On LSU, and also heavily Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. That's a show that's geared to covering all of the sports, everything going on in Louisiana sports. We'll do that probably bi-weekly right now, an hour at a time, but eventually it'll go to weekly, and then we'll see what goes on from there. So if you want to find that, just search Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show. You can find it on the WWL Plus app, as well as on WWLTV.com. The second thing I want you to know about is a show called Saints Squad, and I'm really excited about this one too. That's the one that's going to be here on this channel. You'll probably see glimpses of the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show here on this channel as well, or here as well. Saints Squad, I think, is going to have like the biggest direct impact to Locked On Saints. So Saints Squad is going to be a 4-person show with myself included that will launch, we're hoping April 7th. All right. Monday is what we're hoping for. Hosted by Dylan Sanders, a very, very dear friend of mine that also is a contributing writer over at Saints Wire. He's been covering the Saints for a long time. Myself, John Hendricks, my good friend from over at Second and Saints with Athlon Sports, and not every episode, but often, Super Bowl winning wide receiver Lance Moore, and there might be more to that lineup as well. The four of us, 1 hour live every Monday and Thursday. We'll figure out the time here soon, just so that you know, and that will go across all platforms. Always available here on Locked On Saints. 2 more episodes every week. My 5-day-a-week episodes will not change, but we wanted more content for you. I wanted to find a way to do long-form content for you. Bang, we got it. And it's going to be super, super fun. So come through for those episodes. I'll continue to keep you up to date with it, but I hope that you're excited about both of those shows. I'm incredibly excited about both of them for sure. We'll have more for you on tomorrow's episode. I'm going to go get on a plane and get back to New Orleans. I flew here on Monday. I'm flying out on Tuesday. Let's get it. I can't wait. We'll be back with you tomorrow. I'll pick up any other kind of straggling thoughts around Kellen Moore's availability and, of course, keep you up to date with any other breaking news that you need to know about around your New Orleans Saints. And now we've got 2 more shows to help that happen. I'm so excited. I hope you are too. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jaxson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you. Covering those New Orleans. Knew it was gonna happen.